Opening hook, the spring dance at Juniper Ridge should have been harmless, just fiddles, whiskey, and tired ranchers forgetting their aches for one night. But when Ethan Walker, the loneliest man in Carbon County, blurted out a marriage proposal to the Chinese widow everyone whispered about, the music stopped. Maylin Zhang held his eyes across that stunned silence and said 5 words that would change everything. "I thought you'd never ask, rancher." What began as drunken deflection became the most dangerous truth either of them had ever spoken, because in a town that feasted on scandal and a territory that didn't forgive difference, choosing each other meant risking everything they'd rebuilt from nothing. If you want to know whether love can survive when it's born from a joke and raised under judgment, stay with me until the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Maylin and Ethan's story travels across this wide country of ours. The wind came down off the Medicine Bow Range like it had a grudge, carrying the smell of sage and last night's rain across Ethan Walker's 200 acres of scrubland and stubbornness. He straightened from the fence post he'd been setting, his 4th this morning, and wiped the back of his hand across his forehead, leaving a streak of Wyoming dirt to mix with the sweat already there. 6 years he'd been working this land. 6 years since his father died and left him a ranch that was more mortgage than cattle, more reputation than profit. The townspeople called him dependable. "Steady Ethan," they said. Ethan who showed up when you needed a hand. Ethan who paid his debts on time and never caused trouble, and never, ever talked about the fact that he went home every night to a house so quiet you could hear the mice in the walls. He drove the post deeper with 3 precise strikes of the mallet, each blow landing exactly where it needed to. That was how you survived out here. Precision, patience, and the ability to work through loneliness like it was just another weather condition you couldn't change. "Walker!" Ethan turned to see Tom Brennan riding up the eastern boundary, his bay mare picking her way carefully through the spring mud. Tom ran the feed store in town and had a talent for showing up exactly when you didn't want company. "Thought I'd find you out here beating the hell out of something," Tom said, swinging down from his saddle with the ease of a man who'd spent more of his life on horseback than off. "You know it's Saturday, right? Most folks take a half day. Offenses don't care what day it is." Ethan picked up another post, tested its weight, positioned it in the next hole he'd dug. "No, but people do. You coming to the spring dance tonight?" Ethan drove the post down without answering, his shoulders flexing under his worn cotton shirt. The dance. Every year, the same ritual. The church ladies would string up lanterns, someone would bring a fiddle, and the whole town would gather to pretend that frontier life wasn't mostly loneliness punctuated by small acts of survival. "That's a no then," Tom said, leaning against the fence that didn't need his weight. "You know, hermit rancher might be romantic in dime novels, but out here it just makes you strange." "I'm not a hermit. I was in town 3 days ago. To buy fence wire. That doesn't count." Tom pulled out his tobacco pouch, started rolling a cigarette with practiced fingers. "People are starting to talk, Ethan, wondering if maybe you prefer your own company a little too much." Ethan stopped mid-swing and fixed Tom with a look that had ended more than one unwanted conversation. "Let them wonder. I'm just saying, don't." Tom raised his hands in surrender, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Fine. Die alone, surrounded by perfectly straight fence posts. See if I care." He swung back into his saddle, then paused. "Though you should know, there's someone new in town. Bought the old Bennett place. Widow woman from California way. Chinese, I think. Pretty, if you like that sort of thing. Showed up last month with a wagon full of furniture and not much else." Ethan had heard the gossip, same as everyone. The Bennett place had sat empty for 2 years after old Edgar died, his children back east having no interest in Wyoming dirt. The fact that someone had bought it, and that someone being a woman, alone, and Chinese, had lit up the town's rumor mill like a brush fire in August. "Good for her," Ethan said, turning back to his work. "She'll be at the dance. Thought you might like to know." "Why would I care?" Tom grinned around his cigarette. "Because you're lonely, Ethan, and loneliness makes people do stupid things. Might as well do them at a dance where there's music to cover the awkwardness." He rode off before Ethan could respond, leaving nothing but hoofprints in the mud and the uncomfortable truth hanging in the spring air. Ethan told himself he wasn't going to the dance, told himself again while he washed up, Told himself a third time while he shaved and put on the one good shirt he owned that didn't smell like horses and sweat. The church hall was lit up like a Christmas tree when he arrived, lanterns swinging from the rafters and spilling warm light across the muddy street. He could hear the fiddle already, bright and fast, and the stomp of boots on the wooden floor. For a moment he considered turning around, riding back to the comfortable silence of his empty house. Then he saw her. She stood near the refreshment table, a cup of what was probably terrible punch in her hands, watching the dancers with an expression that wasn't quite loneliness and wasn't quite longing. Something more observant, like she was taking careful notes on how this strange ritual worked. She wore a simple dress, dark blue with a high collar, her black hair pulled back in a neat bun that revealed the elegant line of her neck. Tom had been right about one thing. She was pretty. But pretty wasn't the word that stuck in Ethan's mind as he watched her turn slightly, catching the lantern light across her profile. Self-possessed. That was better. Like she'd learned to carry herself as her own fortress. "That's Mei-Lin Zhang," a voice said beside him. Martha Crawley, the Reverend's wife, had materialized with her usual talent for appearing whenever something interesting might be happening. Widow. Her husband died in a mining accident down in Colorado. She took the insurance money and came north, bought the Bennett place cash. Can you imagine? Ethan could imagine it perfectly, the kind of determination it took to start over alone in a place where everyone would watch every move you made. She keeps to herself mostly, Martha continued, warming to her subject. Polite enough when you speak to her, but doesn't volunteer much. Some of the ladies tried to visit, Christian charity and all that. She served them tea and answered their questions without really answering anything at all. Gracious but closed. You know the type. Ethan did know the type. He was the type. Anyway, Martha said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, between you and me, I think she's lonely. A woman alone out there, no family, no real friends. It's not natural. Neither is gossip, Ethan said mildly, but that doesn't stop anyone. Martha's eyes narrowed. I'm just saying she could use a friend. Someone who understands what it's like to work a place alone. Someone who... She stopped, and Ethan could practically see the matchmaking wheels turning in her head. You know what? Never mind. Go get yourself some punch, Ethan. You look thirsty. She swept away to terrorize someone else, leaving Ethan standing there like an idiot, staring at a woman he'd never spoken to and trying to remember when he'd forgotten how to act like a normal human being around people. He was still standing there when she turned and caught him looking. For a second that lasted approximately one eternity, their eyes met across the crowded room. She didn't smile, didn't look away, didn't do any of the things women usually did when they caught a man staring. She just held his gaze with that same careful observation, like she was trying to read something in his face that he wasn't sure he wanted written there. Then someone bumped into him, Charlie Morrison, already 3 drinks past sober, and the moment broke. Walker, didn't expect to see you here. Charlie clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to hurt. Thought you'd given up on human company entirely. Still considering it, Ethan muttered. Come on, have a drink. It's a party. Charlie thrust a cup of something that definitely wasn't punch into Ethan's hand. You know what your problem is? You think too much. You need to relax, live a little, maybe even talk to a woman. He gestured broadly toward the refreshment table where Mei-Lin had been standing, but she'd moved away, disappearing into the crowd near the door. Ethan drank whatever Charlie had given him, whiskey, rough and warm, and let the noise of the party wash over him. The fiddle player had been joined by someone on a guitar, and the music had shifted from bright reels to something slower, more forgiving. Couples moved onto the floor, men in their cleanest work clothes and women in dresses they probably spent weeks sewing. He watched it all from the edges, the way he always did. Watched Tom Brennan dance with Sarah Mitchell. Watched the Reverend's daughter laugh at something one of the Johnson boys said. Watched the community he'd lived in his entire life celebrate another season survived, another winter ended. And he watched Mei-Lin Zhang slip out the side door into the spring darkness, alone. He told himself not to follow her. Told himself it was none of his business why a woman might need air and space. Told himself that whatever loneliness he thought he'd recognized in her eyes was probably just his own loneliness looking for company. He followed her anyway. She'd walked about 50 yards from the church hall, far enough that the music became a gentle suggestion rather than a demand. She stood with her back to him, looking up at the stars that came out fierce and bright once you got away from even the small lights of town. I'm not very good at parties either, Ethan said. She didn't jump, didn't startle, just turned slowly, like she'd known someone would follow and had been waiting to see who it would be. Mr. Walker, she said, and her voice was low and clear, with just the faintest trace of an accent that spoke of other places, other lives before this one. Martha Crawley told me about you, said you were the loneliest man in Carbon County, but that you fixed her daughter's wagon wheel last fall and wouldn't take payment. Martha talks too much. She was trying to help. She thinks we'd be good for each other, two lonely people on neighboring properties. A small smile touched the corners of her mouth. She's very subtle. Despite himself, Ethan almost laughed. Subtle as a cattle stampede. They stood there in the darkness between them, the music drifting out from the church hall where people who understood how to be with other people danced and laughed and pretended tomorrow's work wouldn't be just as hard as yesterday's. I should go back, Maylin said, but she didn't move. Should I? I don't know. Should you? Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he recognized. The careful way she held herself, the way her eyes tracked everything but revealed nothing. The invisible fence she'd built around herself that said this far and no further. He'd built the same fence around himself for 6 years. Probably not, he said finally, but I'm not very good at doing what I should. Then we have that in common. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Did you really refuse payment from Mrs. Crawley's daughter? It was just a wheel, took 20 minutes. And the fence you helped Tom Brennan repair last month? Who told you about that? Tom did. He came by my place to deliver some supplies. Talked the entire time about what a good man you are. How you never ask for help, but you're always the first one there when someone else needs it. She paused. He also said you haven't had a conversation longer than 3 sentences in 2 years. This one's going to break my record. Her smile deepened slightly, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in so long he'd forgotten what to call it. Interest. Attraction. The dangerous beginning of hope. I should tell you, Maylin said quietly, that half the women in that church hall are watching us right now through the window. And by tomorrow morning, the entire town will have us married with 3 children. Probably 4. This town doesn't think small. Does that bother you? Ethan considered the question honestly. Did it bother him that people would talk, that they'd add this conversation to all the other gossip about the strange Chinese widow and the hermit rancher, that they'd make assumptions and spread stories and generally make both their lives more complicated? Not as much as going back in there bothers me, he said. Maylin laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine, and the sound of it did something to the Wyoming darkness, made it feel less vast, less empty. I bought the Bennett place because I wanted to disappear, she said, and there was no self-pity in her voice, just statement of fact. My husband died, and everyone in California had opinions about what I should do next. Go back to China. Find another husband quickly. Sell everything and move in with his family. Everyone had a plan for my life except me. She looked up at the stars again. I wanted somewhere nobody knew me, somewhere I could figure out who I was without him. Did it work? I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. Ethan understood that too. The way grief could make you a stranger to yourself. The way losing someone could mean losing the map you'd been using to navigate your own life. My father died 6 years ago, he said. Left me the ranch and enough debt to bury 3 men. Everyone said I should sell, get out while I could. Go to California maybe. Start over somewhere easier. He shook his head. I stayed because leaving felt like admitting I couldn't do it. Couldn't make something of what he'd left me. Couldn't prove that I was strong enough to handle it alone. And did you? Prove it? I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. She turned to face him fully, and in the starlight her eyes were dark and deep and filled with something that might have been understanding. I think, she said slowly, that we're both very good at being alone. We've made an art form of it, built whole lives around the idea that needing anyone is weakness. You think that's wrong? I think it's exhausting. The music from the church hall shifted again, something slower, sadder, a a waltz that spoke of endings and beginnings tangled together. Ethan could see the shapes of dancers through the windows, moving in careful circles, following patterns everyone knew by heart. "Would you like to walk?" Mei Lin asked. "Just a little further, away from the eyes." They walked. The town of Juniper Ridge sat in a valley between two ranges of mountains that turned purple in certain lights. It consisted of one main street, 3 saloons, 2 churches competing for souls, a feed store, a general store, and about 200 people who all knew each other's business better than they knew their own. It was the kind of place where strangers stood out like blood on snow, and difference was something to be managed, categorized, and controlled. Mei Lin had learned that within a week of arriving. "They mean well," she said as they walked down the rutted road that led away from town toward the dark shapes of the outlying ranches. "The ladies who visit, the men who tip their hats and ask if I need help with anything, they're trying to be kind. But their kindness comes with expectations, questions, the assumption that I'll eventually fold myself into the shape they've decided I should be." She paused. "They can't understand why a woman would choose to live alone, why I didn't immediately start looking for another husband, or why I bought a ranch instead of a house in town where they could keep an eye on me." "What did you tell them?" "That I like my own company, that I'm not afraid of hard work, that my late husband left me enough money to choose my own life, and I chose this one." She glanced at him. "They don't believe me." "I believe you." "Why?" Ethan thought about it. "Because I've spent 6 years telling myself the same thing, that choosing to be alone isn't the same as being lonely, that not needing anyone is a strength, not a wound." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "And I've spent 6 years wondering if I'm lying to myself." The honesty of it hung between them, raw and unexpected. Mei Lin's expression shifted, something in her eyes that might have been recognition or relief or the dangerous beginning of trust. "My husband was a good man," she said quietly. "Kind, hardworking. He loved me in the way he knew how to love, but he also loved his work more. The mine, the other miners, the dream of striking it rich. I was his wife, and he cared for me, but I was never his priority." She wrapped her arms around herself, though the spring night was mild. "When he died, I grieved him, but I also felt something I wasn't supposed to feel." "What was that?" "Free." The word came out like a confession. "I felt free, and then I felt guilty for feeling free, and then I got angry at myself for feeling guilty about something that wasn't my fault." She smiled, but there was pain in it. Grief is complicated. "Yes," Ethan said simply, because what else was there to say? He knew about complicated grief. About the way you could miss someone and be relieved they were gone at the same time. About the guilt that came with survival. They started walking again, slower now, letting the conversation unfold at its own pace. "The worst part," Mei Lin continued, "is that everyone expected me to be devastated, to fall apart, to need saving. And when I didn't, when I took the insurance money and made plans and bought a ranch in Wyoming, they acted like I was doing something wrong. Like grief is supposed to destroy you, and if it doesn't, you must not have loved them enough." "People are idiots," she laughed, surprised. Yes, they are. They said the same thing about me when my father died, expected me to collapse, to fail, to prove that I was too young, too inexperienced, too alone to handle a ranch." Ethan's jaw tightened with the memory. "I spent the first year working myself half to death just to prove them wrong. Built fences, fixed buildings, paid off debt. Showed up to every town meeting, every church service, every goddamn community event, just so they could see I wasn't broken." "And were you broken?" "Probably, but I didn't let them see it." Mei Lin nodded slowly. "That's the thing they don't tell you about survival. It looks like strength from the outside, but inside you're just holding pieces together with spit and wire, hoping nobody looks too close." They had reached the edge of town now, where the road split. One direction toward Ethan's ranch to the north, the other toward the Bennett place to the west. The mountains rose up black against the star-filled sky, ancient and indifferent to human struggling. "I should go back," Mei Lin said, but again she didn't move. "Do you want to?" "No." "Then don't." She looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan wondered what she saw. A lonely man who didn't know how to talk to people anymore? A rancher who'd built his life around not needing anyone? Or something else? Something she recognized because she carried it too? This is dangerous, she said softly. What is? This, talking, being honest, admitting that we're both just barely holding it together. She shook her head. In a town like this, honesty is ammunition. Someone will find a way to use it against us. Let them try. You say that now, but you haven't been an outsider. You were born here. These people know your family, know your history. They'll forgive you almost anything because you're one of them. Her voice hardened slightly. I'm not. I'll always be the Chinese widow who bought the Bennett place, the strange woman who lives alone, the outsider who doesn't quite fit. Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but she wasn't wrong. He'd seen how the town treated difference, the careful distance they kept from anyone who didn't match their idea of normal, the way they'd smiled at Mei Lin while whispering about her behind closed doors. Then we'll be dangerous together, he said. She blinked. What? You said this is dangerous, talking, being honest. Fine. Let's be dangerous together. Let them whisper. Let them make up stories. We'll know the truth, and that'll be enough. Will it? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. Didn't know if truth would be enough in a place that valued conformity over authenticity, appearance over honesty. But standing there in the spring darkness with a woman who understood loneliness the way he did, who'd built the same walls and worn the same armor and survived the same kind of grief, standing there felt like the first honest moment he'd had in years. I don't know, he said finally, but I'd like to find out. Mei Lin studied his face for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she held out her hand. I'm Mei Lin Zhang. I'm 32 years old. I'm a widow. I bought a ranch I barely know how to run because I wanted to prove I could build a life on my own terms. I'm lonely and scared, and some days I wonder if I made a terrible mistake coming here. She paused. But I'm also stronger than people think, and I'm tired of pretending I'm not interested in finding out what happens when I stop building walls. Ethan took her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work, a working hand like his own. I'm Ethan Walker. I'm 34. I inherited a ranch that's tried to kill me about 6 different ways. I'm lonely too, though I've spent 6 years telling myself I'm not. I don't know how to talk to people anymore, and I'm not very good at asking for help, and I probably should have sold this place and left years ago. He held her gaze. But I'm still here, and I'm tired of being alone just to prove I can be. They stood there, hands clasped. 2 people who'd built their lives around not needing anyone, admitting, finally, carefully, that maybe they'd been wrong. What happens now? Mei Lin asked. I don't know. But we could start with tomorrow. I could ride over to your place, help you with whatever needs fixing. No payment, no obligation, just... He searched for the right words. Just 2 neighbors helping each other. And the day after that? Same thing. And the day after that too. Until helping each other starts to feel less like charity and more like choice. Mei Lin's smile was small but real, touched with something that might have been hope. That sounds dangerous, Mr. Walker. Call me Ethan, and yes, it probably is. They walked back toward town together, not touching, not speaking, but somehow less alone than they'd been an hour ago. The music had stopped by the time they reached the church hall, the party winding down into the quiet conversations of people heading home to beds and early morning chores. Martha Crawley watched them from the doorway, her eyes bright with curiosity and calculation. Tom Brennan tipped his hat and grinned like he'd won a bet with himself. Sarah Mitchell whispered something to her sister, both of them watching with the frank assessment of women who knew exactly what they were seeing. Let them watch, Ethan thought. Let them whisper and wonder and make their plans. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't care. He helped Mei Lin into her wagon, a small gesture, but one that felt significant in its ordinariness. She gathered the reins with capable hands, looked down at him with those dark, observant eyes. Tomorrow then, she said. Tomorrow. She drove away into the darkness, and Ethan stood there watching until the sound of her wagon faded into the night sounds of spring, crickets and wind, and the distant yip of coyotes on the hunt. Tom materialized at his elbow, smelling of whiskey and satisfaction. Well, well, steady Ethan Walker, making conversation with a woman. Never thought I'd see the day. Go home, Tom. I'm just saying that's progress. Real progress. Maybe there's hope for you yet. Tom? All right, all right. I'm going. He started toward his horse, then turned back. But for what it's worth, she seems like good people, the real kind. Don't fuck it up. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Anytime, friend. Anytime. Ethan rode home through darkness that felt different somehow, less oppressive, less vast. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human hoping, but he looked up at them anyway and allowed himself something he hadn't allowed in years. He allowed himself to want. The next morning came cold and clear, the kind of Wyoming spring morning that promised summer but hadn't quite committed yet. Ethan was up before dawn, the way he always was, but this time his morning routine felt different. He found himself taking more care with his appearance, washing more thoroughly, choosing a cleaner shirt, even running a comb through his hair before jamming his hat on. He told himself it was just being neighborly, told himself it didn't mean anything that he'd woken up thinking about dark eyes and honest conversation, told himself he was just keeping his word, showing up the way he'd said he would. He didn't believe himself for a second. The Bennett place, Maylin's place now, sat about 5 miles west of his own land, close enough to be neighborly, but far enough to require intention. Edgar Bennett had run cattle here for 30 years before his heart gave out, and the place showed signs of neglect. Fences sagging, barn roof missing shingles, the house itself wearing a layer of dust that spoke of years without a woman's care. But as Ethan rode up the long drive, he could see changes. The windows were clean, reflecting the morning sun. Flowers had been planted along the front of the house, something bright and defiant against the Wyoming brown. A vegetable garden had been started near the kitchen door, neat rows already showing the green promise of growth. Maylin was in the barn when he arrived, wrestling with what looked like a broken stall door. She'd tied her hair back with a piece of cloth and wore men's work pants under a long shirt, practical clothing that had probably scandalized the church ladies but made perfect sense for ranch work. "Ethan," she said, looking up as he dismounted. Her face was flushed with effort, and there was a smudge of dust across her cheek. "You came." "Said I would." "Yes, but people say a lot of things. Following through is rarer." She gestured at the door. "This has been driving me mad for 3 days. The whole frame is warped, and I can't get it to hang straight." Ethan examined the door, running his hands along the frame. Edgar had built solid, but time and weather had done their work. The wood had swelled with moisture, throwing everything out of alignment. "You'll need to plane down this edge," he said, "and reset the hinges. Probably replace this bottom board too. See how it's rotting? That's where your problem is." "Can you show me?" He looked at her, surprised. Most people would have asked him to fix it. She was asking him to teach her. "Sure," he said. They worked through the morning, Ethan demonstrating and explaining while Maylin watched carefully, asked questions, took mental notes. She had good instincts for the work, steady hands, patience with the tedious parts, willingness to do something 3 times until she got it right. "My husband never taught me any of this," she said as she carefully planed wood under Ethan's direction. "He thought it wasn't appropriate for women. Said I should focus on the house and let him handle everything else." "That's stupid," she laughed. "Yes, but it was how he was raised. Men's work, women's work, clear lines between them." She blew sawdust off the board, examined her progress. "When he died, I realized how helpless he'd made me. I didn't know how to fix anything, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to handle business. I had to learn everything from scratch." "You're learning fast." "I'm motivated. Pride is an excellent teacher." She set down the plane, flexed her hands. "Though so is desperation. When it's fix it yourself or do without, you learn quickly." They reset the door together, Ethan holding it in place while Maylin drove the screws home. When they tested it, it swung smooth and true, no more dragging or sticking. "There," Ethan said. "Good as new." Maylin ran her hand along the wood, satisfaction clear in her face. "Thank you. Not just for the help, for the teaching. That's worth more." "You paid attention. That's the important part." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Ethan felt that same shift in his chest he'd felt the night before, like something sealed tight was beginning to crack open. "I made bread this morning," she said, "and there's coffee. Real coffee. Not the terrible stuff they sell at the general store. Would you? She hesitated. Would you like some? Before you go? Ethan should have said no, should have made his excuses, ridden home, kept things simple and safe. But he thought about his empty house, the silence waiting there, the coffee he'd drink alone while staring at walls. I'd like that, he said. What? Her kitchen was small but immaculate, everything in its place with the kind of order that spoke of someone who found comfort in routine. The bread was still warm from the oven, the coffee rich and dark, and better than anything Ethan had tasted in months. They sat at her table, rough pine that Edgar had probably built himself, and ate bread with butter and honey while the morning sun slanted through clean windows. This is good, Ethan said, because it was, and because silence felt wrong in this space she'd created. My mother's recipe. One of the few things I insisted on keeping when I left California. Mei Lin poured more coffee, her movements graceful and economical. She was born in China, came to America as a girl, learned to bake American bread so she could sell it to miners, said that if she was going to live in a strange land, she might as well profit from it. Smart woman. Stubborn woman. She refused to be what anyone expected. Married my father because she loved him, not because it was arranged. Opened a bakery when people said Chinese women shouldn't own businesses. Raised me to believe I could do the same. Mei Lin's expression softened with memory. She died 5 years ago, just before I married. I think she would have liked this place. Would have approved of me choosing to build something on my own. Ethan thought about his own parents. His mother dead in childbirth when he was too young to remember her. His father, a hard man who believed affection was weakness and approval had to be earned. He'd spent his whole life trying to earn that approval, right up until the day his father died without ever giving it. My father wouldn't have approved of anything I've done, he said. He thought I was soft. Too interested in books, not interested enough in proving I was tough. When he got sick, he told me I'd lose the ranch within a year, that I didn't have what it took. But you didn't lose it. No, I proved him wrong. Spent 6 years proving him wrong. Ethan stared into his coffee cup. Some days I wonder if that's the only reason I'm still here. Spite. Spite is underrated. It's kept me going more times than I can count. They sat in companionable quiet. Two people who understood the weight of other people's expectations, the exhaustion of constant proving. The coffee was good. The bread was good. The silence was better. Not empty, not oppressive, just shared space between people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Can I ask you something? Mei Lin said finally. Yes. Last night you said you wanted to find out what happens when you stop being alone. Did you mean that? Ethan considered lying, taking it back, protecting himself the way he'd been protecting himself for 6 years. But Mei Lin was watching him with those observant eyes, and he'd already decided to be honest with her. Yes, he said. I meant it. Why now? Why after 6 years? Because 6 years is a long time to be lonely, and because... He stopped, struggled for the right words. Because I looked at you last night, and I recognized something. The way you hold yourself, the walls you've built, the careful distance you keep. I recognized it because I've built the same thing. He met her eyes. And I thought maybe if we're both tired of being alone, maybe we could figure out how to be less alone together. That's terrifying. Yes. And dangerous. Probably. And this town will make assumptions. They'll talk, they'll push us together or pull us apart depending on how they feel that day. Let them. Mei Lin smiled, but there was uncertainty in it too. I don't know how to do this, Ethan. I was married for 8 years, but I'm not sure I ever really knew how to be with someone, how to let them in. My husband and I, we lived parallel lives, friendly, polite, but separate. I don't want that again. Neither do I. So what do we do? Ethan thought about it, about the careful choreography of courtship, the rules and expectations that came with it, about all the ways people pretended to be something they weren't in order to win approval. We could try being honest, he said. No games, no pretending, just showing up, helping each other, seeing what grows. What if nothing grows? Then at least we'll have tried. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what if. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his, palm to palm. Her skin was warm, slightly rough from work. Real. All right, she said. let's try. And just like that, something began. The trying started small, the way most honest things do. 3 days after the spring dance, Ethan found a jar of honey on his fence post. Wildflower honey, the kind that tasted like summer distilled into amber sweetness. No note, no explanation, just the jar sitting there in the early morning light like a question he didn't know how to answer. He rode over to her place that afternoon with a bundle of sage he'd cut from the high meadow, the kind that grew silver green and smelled like rain coming. Left it tied to her gatepost with a piece of leather cord. The next week she brought him bread when his fence line ran close to her property, warm loaf wrapped in cloth that still held the heat of her oven. They stood on opposite sides of the wire talking about weather and cattle and the price of feed while the bread cooled between them, neither of them mentioning that this was becoming something, that these small exchanges were adding up to a language they were inventing together. "Your north pasture needs attention," Mei Lin said, shading her eyes against the noon sun. "I can see from my ridge that the fence is down in 3 places." "I know, been meaning to get to it. I could help, if you wanted." Ethan looked at her standing there in her work clothes and wide-brimmed hat. This woman who'd been a rancher's wife for 8 years, but was still learning to be a rancher herself, offering to spend her time fixing his fences. "You've got your own work," he said. "I do, but I also have hands that work just fine, and you helped me with my barn door without asking for payment. This is me paying it back." "I don't want payment." "Good, because I'm not offering payment. I'm offering help. There's a difference." She tilted her head, studying him with that careful observation that made him feel seen in ways he wasn't entirely comfortable with. "Unless you're one of those men who can't accept help from a woman. In which case, tell me now so I know what kind of stubborn I'm dealing with." Despite himself, Ethan smiled. "Not that kind, just the regular kind. Regular stubborn I can work with." They fixed his north fence together over the next 2 days, working in the kind of rhythm that develops between people who respect each other's competence. Mei Lin learned fast and remembered everything, her hands growing more confident with each post they set, each wire they strung tight. "My husband would have hated this," she said on the second day, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Me working alongside a man who wasn't him. He was jealous that way. Not violently, just possessive. Like I was something he owned rather than someone he'd chosen." Ethan drove a staple into the wood with 3 precise strikes. "Sounds lonely." It was. "Even when we were together, I was alone. Does that make sense?" "More than you know." They worked in silence for a while, the sound of their tools against wood and wire punctuating the afternoon stillness. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals only it could feel. The mountains stood purple and patient in the distance. "I haven't asked you about your father much," Mei Lin said eventually. "What he was like. How he died." "Not much to tell. He worked himself to death trying to prove something to people who stopped caring years before. Heart gave out in the barn one morning. I found him 3 hours later." Ethan tested the tension on the wire, made a minor adjustment. "He was a hard man. Believed affection made you soft. Thought showing approval would make me weak. Did it work? Did being hard make you stronger?" "It made me lonely. Same as you." Mei Lin reached over and touched his shoulder, just briefly, just enough to acknowledge what he'd said. Then she went back to work, giving him the gift of not needing to say more. That night, Ethan rode home with the knowledge that he'd told Mei Lin things he'd never told anyone. That somehow in the space of a few weeks, this woman had become the person he talked to when talking felt necessary. The person whose opinion mattered. The person whose absence would leave a hole. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like relief. Tom Brennan noticed, of course. Tom noticed everything, especially when it gave him ammunition for friendly harassment. "Saw you and the widow Zhang working your north fence," he said, when Ethan came into the feed store the following week. "Looked real cozy, real neighborly." "We were fixing a fence, Tom. That's what neighbors do." "Uh-huh. And the fact that she's pretty and single and living alone has nothing to do with how helpful you're being. Are you going to sell me feed or talk me to death?" Tom grinned and started measuring out the order. "Can I do both?" Multitasking, they call it. Very modern. He dumped grain into the sack with deliberate slowness. "Seriously, though, Ethan, People are starting to talk, and not in a bad way, before you get all defensive. They think it's nice. Steady Ethan Walker finally showing interest in something other than fence posts and loneliness. People should mind their business. People should, yes, but people are people, and in a town this small, other people's business is the only entertainment we've got. Tom tied off the feed sack, hoisted it like it weighed nothing. For what it's worth, I think she's good for you. You smile more, talk more, seem less like you're just going through the motions of being alive. Ethan wanted to argue, to tell Tom he was reading too much into simple neighborliness. But Tom was right, and they both knew it. Something had shifted. Ethan was sleeping better, eating regular meals instead of whatever required the least effort, finding himself looking forward to mornings instead of just enduring them. She makes good bread, he said finally. I'm sure that's all it is. The bread. Tom loaded the feed sack onto Ethan's wagon, still grinning. You know what you should do? You should invite her to the church social next month. Show up together instead of separately. Make it official that you're courting. We're not courting. What do you call it then? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. What were they doing? Helping each other? Yes. Talking honestly? Definitely. Slowly building something that felt important and fragile and dangerous all at once. But courting suggested intention, a direction, a future that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged. We're figuring it out, he said. Tom's expression softened. That's all anyone does, friend. We're all just figuring it out as we go. But here's some free advice from a man who waited too long to figure things out with Sarah Mitchell and lost her to the Johnson boy. Don't wait. Life's too short and this territory's too hard to waste time pretending you don't want what you want. The words stayed with Ethan as he drove home, rolling around in his head like stones in a tumbler, getting smoother with each turn, but no less substantial. Don't wait. Don't waste time pretending you don't want what you want. The question was, what did he want? He thought he knew. But knowing and admitting were different things, and admission required courage. He wasn't sure he possessed. The church social Tom had mentioned came faster than Ethan expected, arriving with the kind of sunny Saturday that Wyoming specialized in. Bright, clear, warm enough to make you forget that winter had tried to kill you just 3 months ago. The whole town turned out, spreading blankets on the grass near Willow Creek, the women unpacking baskets of food while the men set up tables and the children ran wild in that particular way that suggested freedom from school and chores. Ethan almost didn't go. Told himself he had work to do, fences to check, cattle to count, all the usual excuses. But then he thought about showing up alone again, being steady Ethan who stood at the edges watching life happen to other people, and something in him rebelled. He went to May Lynn's place first. She was in her garden when he rode up, kneeling in the dirt transplanting seedlings with the kind of focused attention she brought to everything. She'd tied her hair back with a blue ribbon that matched her work dress, and there was dirt on her hands and her knees and somehow a smudge on her cheek. "Ethan?" she said, looking up with surprise and something else, pleasure maybe, or just the simple happiness of seeing someone whose company you valued. "I wasn't expecting you today. There's a social at Willow Creek, church thing. Probably terrible food and forced conversation." He dismounted, suddenly uncertain. "I thought maybe you'd want to go. With me. Together, I mean. Not separately and happening to be at the same place, but..." He stopped, hearing himself stumble over words like a boy asking his first girl to a dance. May Lynn stood, brushing dirt from her dress, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Are you asking me to accompany you to a social gathering, Ethan Walker? I'm asking if you want to go together. If you want to arrive together and leave together and let people see that we're..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Together?" she suggested. "Yes." She studied him for a long moment, and Ethan wondered what she saw. A lonely rancher trying to be brave? A man finally admitting he wanted something other than solitude? Or just someone who was tired of pretending that showing up alone was a choice rather than a habit? "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Give me 20 minutes to change into something that doesn't smell like compost and dirt." She emerged from the house in a dress Ethan had never seen. Green cotton with small white flowers, simple but well-fitted, with her hair loose around her shoulders instead of tied back. She'd cleaned the dirt from her face and hands, put on a hat against the sun, and somehow transformed from the capable rancher he'd been working alongside into something that made his breath catch. "You're staring," she said. You look nice. Nice enough to cause scandal when we show up together? Probably. Good. She took the hand he offered and let him help her into the wagon, settling beside him with the kind of easy grace that suggested she'd made her decision and wasn't second-guessing it. I've been respectable and quiet long enough. Let them talk. They drove to Willow Creek side by side, the wagon creaking over rutted roads while the afternoon sun poured down golden and generous. Ethan was aware of her beside him in a way that made him hyper-conscious of every movement. The way her shoulder occasionally brushed his, the scent of lavender soap mixed with the earth smell that clung to both of them, the sound of her breathing keeping time with the rhythm of the horse's hooves. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "Yes." "Me too." She looked at him, her expression open and honest. "I've never done this before. Chosen someone publicly. With my husband, it was arranged through family, private courtship, proper protocols, everyone knowing their role. This feels different, dangerous. We can turn back. Show up separately. Keep it quiet. Is that what you want?" Ethan thought about it, really thought about it. The safe choice would be to maintain the careful distance they'd been keeping, to let people think whatever they wanted while never confirming anything. But safety had gotten him 6 years of loneliness and the certainty that he was strong enough to survive alone. He was tired of just surviving. "No," he said. "I want people to know. I want to walk in there with you and let them see that I choose this, that I choose you." Maylene's hand found his on the wagon seat, her fingers threading through his with the kind of certainty that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment, this admission, this choice. "Then let's give them something to talk about," she said. The social was exactly as advertised, blankets spread on grass, tables groaning with food, children playing tag near the creek while their parents pretended to supervise. The usual crowd milled around in their usual formations. The men gathered near the makeshift bar discussing cattle and weather, the women clustered around the food tables trading recipes and gossip. Conversation didn't stop when Ethan and Maylin arrived together, but it definitely paused. Heads turned, eyes widened. Martha Crawley's mouth actually fell open slightly before she recovered and turned to whisper something urgent to Sarah Mitchell. Tom Brennan caught Ethan's eye from across the clearing and raised his cup in salute, his grin saying, "I told you so," louder than words ever could. "Everyone's staring," Maylin said quietly. "Let them. Your reputation as a respectable rancher is about to take a hit. I'll survive." She laughed, and the sound of it seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the gathering. People went back to their conversations, though Ethan could feel the weight of observation like physical pressure. They were being watched, assessed, discussed. Every interaction would be analyzed, every gesture interpreted, every word weighed for meaning. He should have hated it, should have felt exposed and judged. Instead, he felt something like defiance rising in his chest. Let them watch, let them talk. He was done hiding what he wanted behind propriety and careful distance. "Ethan, Maylan." Martha Crawley descended on them with the determination of a woman on a mission, her face bright with curiosity barely disguised as Christian welcome. "How wonderful to see you both. Together. Did you come together? Of course you came together, I can see that. How lovely, how absolutely lovely." "Hello, Martha," Maylin said with the kind of polite warmth that revealed nothing. "You must try the potato salad. Sarah Mitchell made it and it's divine. And there's roast chicken and someone brought a ham, though I'm not sure who. It just appeared, you know how these things are. Food multiplying like, well, never mind. The important thing is there's plenty." She paused, eyes darting between them like a bird spotting shiny objects. "So, together. That's new. That's very new. I mean, I'd heard rumors, of course, but hearing and seeing are different things entirely." "We're neighbors," Ethan said. Seemed practical to share a wagon. "Practical." "Yes, very practical." Martha's smile suggested she didn't believe a word of it. "Well, you two enjoy yourselves. Together, practically." She swept away to terrorize someone else, leaving Ethan and Maylin standing there trying not to laugh. "That went well," Maylin said. "Give it 5 minutes. The whole town will know we arrived together and what it means." "And what does it mean?" Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd somehow become essential to his days, whose opinion mattered more than the collective judgment of everyone in Juniper Ridge. who made him want to be braver than he'd ever been. "It means I'm tired of pretending I don't care about you," he said. "It means I want people to know that when I show up somewhere, you're the person I want beside me. It means—" He stopped, struggling for words big enough to hold what he was feeling. "It means we're together," Mei Lin finished. "Officially, publicly, scandalously." "Yes." She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Not the careful, polite smile she gave to church ladies and curious townsfolk, but something genuine and unguarded that made Ethan's heart do complicated things in his chest. "Good," she said. "I was getting tired of being careful." They filled plates with food they barely tasted, found a spot on the edge of the gathering where they could sit without being surrounded, and settled into the strange new reality of being together in public. People wandered by to say hello, some genuine, some clearly fishing for information, all of them noticing, commenting, adding this moment to the collective narrative of small-town life. The Reverend stopped by to discuss weather and scripture in equal measure. Sarah Mitchell brought them lemonade and asked pointed questions about fence repair, while her eyes said something else entirely. Even old Edgar Mitchell, who rarely spoke to anyone, paused long enough to tell Ethan that Mei Lin seemed like good people and he'd better not screw it up. Through it all, Mei Lin handled the attention with quiet dignity, answering questions without giving away more than she wanted to, smiling at the right moments, deflecting curiosity with the kind of grace that came from years of being watched and assessed. But Ethan could feel the tension in her beside him, the way her shoulders held themselves just a fraction too tight, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when talking to certain people. "You want to leave?" he said quietly during a lull in the social obligations. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to me." She looked at him, gratitude and relief mixed in her expression. "I'm not very good at this. Being on display, performing pleasantness for people who are really just collecting information to discuss later." "Neither am I." "Then why did we come?" "Because hiding seemed worse. Because I wanted everyone to know I choose you." He stood, offered his hand. "But we've been here long enough, made our statement. Let's go home." They made their excuses. Early start tomorrow, cattle to check, the usual rancher obligations that everyone understood, and headed back to the wagon. Behind them, Ethan could hear the buzz of conversation resume, louder now, energized by their departure and what it might mean. "They're going to talk about us all night," Mei Lin said as Ethan helped her into the wagon. "Let them. We gave them a good show." "Is that what this was? A show?" Ethan climbed up beside her, gathered the reins, turned to face her fully. "No, this was me being honest about what I want, about who I want. If that happens to give them something to talk about, that's their problem, not mine." The drive back to her place felt different from the drive there. Less nervous, more settled, like they'd crossed some invisible line and couldn't go back even if they wanted to. The sun was starting its slow descent toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and gold that made the harsh landscape look almost gentle. "Will you come in?" Mei Lin asked when they reached her gate. "I made apple pie yesterday. Seems a shame to eat it alone." Ethan knew what the invitation really meant. Not just pie, but time. Conversation. The continuation of whatever they'd started at that church social, away from watching eyes and curious whispers. The chance to figure out what they were to each other without an audience. "I'd like that," he said. Her kitchen smelled like apples and cinnamon, the pie still perfect under a cloth on the sideboard. She cut them both generous slices while Ethan made coffee with the ease of someone who'd been in this kitchen enough times to know where everything lived. They sat at her table the way they'd sat there before, but something had shifted. The careful distance they'd been maintaining had collapsed, replaced by something closer, more dangerous, more real. "I was married for 8 years, Mei Lin said, her fork making patterns in the pie on her plate. "And I don't think my husband and I ever had a conversation like the ones you and I have. Real conversations, I mean, about fear and loneliness and what we actually want instead of what we're supposed to want." "What was he like, your husband?" She considered the question, her expression thoughtful. Kind, hardworking, practical. "He treated me well, never raised his voice, provided for me the way a husband should. But he also kept me at a distance. There was a wall between us that I could never quite get through. I'd try to talk to him about my feelings, my hopes, and he'd just not engage. Change the subject. Tell me I was being emotional, that I should focus on practical matters. She looked up at Ethan. After a while, I stopped trying, built my own walls to match his. We lived together, but we weren't really together. Does that make sense? Yes. I don't want that again. I don't want polite distance masquerading as marriage. I don't want someone who treats me well but doesn't actually see me. Her voice was steady but intense, like she was laying down terms for a negotiation that mattered more than anything. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll keep being honest, even when it's hard, even when it would be easier to just smile and change the subject. Promise me that if you have doubts or fears or second thoughts, you'll tell me instead of just pulling away. She reached across the table, placed her hand over his. I can handle honesty. I can't handle pretending. Ethan turned his hand palm up, threading his fingers through hers. I promise. But you have to promise the same thing. No pretending. No building walls just because it feels safer. Deal. They sat there holding hands across her kitchen table while the light outside shifted from gold to amber to the deep purple of early evening. Ethan thought about his empty house waiting for him 5 miles north, the familiar silence he'd be returning to, the bed he'd been sleeping in alone for 6 years. He thought about staying. I should go, he said, not moving. You should, Mei-Lin agreed, not releasing his hand. It's getting dark. It is. People will talk if they find out I was here after dark. They'll talk anyway. They're already talking. Ethan stood, but instead of heading for the door, he walked around the table to where Mei-Lin sat. She looked up at him, her eyes dark and deep and full of questions he wasn't sure he knew how to answer. I don't know how to do this, he said. Courting, relationships, being honest about what I want. I'm probably going to make mistakes. So will I. But I want to try. I want to figure it out with you. She stood, closing the distance between them until they were close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, smell the lavender soap and the apple pie, and something underneath that was just her. Close enough that when she spoke, he felt her breath against his chest. Then try, she said. He kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or practiced or smooth. It was tentative and careful and real. The kiss of two people who'd forgotten how to want someone and were remembering together. Her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the worn cotton of his shirt. His hands found her waist, steadying them both. When they broke apart, Mei-Lin was smiling, that real smile that transformed her face, unguarded and genuine. Well, she said, that's a statement. Too much? Not enough. She kissed him again, less tentative this time, more certain. But it's a good start. Ethan did go home eventually, riding through darkness that felt less vast than it used to, less lonely. The stars were out in full force, brilliant and indifferent, and he looked up at them and allowed himself something he'd been afraid to feel for years. He allowed himself to hope. Hope, Ethan discovered, was more dangerous than loneliness. Loneliness was familiar, predictable, something you could plan around and manage. Hope was wild and uncontrollable, demanding things you weren't sure you could deliver and promising things that might break you if they fell through. The weeks after the church social blurred together in a pattern of work and wanting, fence posts and shared meals, long conversations that stretched into evening and kisses that left him thinking about her when he should have been thinking about cattle. He rode over to her place most mornings, helped with whatever needed fixing or building or tending, and she did the same for him. The two of them falling into a rhythm that felt both natural and terrifying in its implications. The town noticed. Of course the town noticed. In a place where entertainment was scarce and gossip was currency, Ethan Walker and Mei-Lin Zhang courting was front-page news without the benefit of an actual newspaper. Martha Crawley asked me yesterday if we'd set a date, Mei-Lin said one afternoon while they worked on her chicken coop, replacing boards that had rotted through the previous winter. She seemed disappointed when I told her we hadn't discussed marriage. We've been courting for 3 weeks. I pointed that out. She said when you know, and waiting is just wasting time. Mei-Lin fitted a new board into place, testing its alignment before reaching for the hammer. She also said her nephew got married after courting for 2 weeks, and they've been happy for 30 years, so clearly speed is no impediment to success. Martha's nephew married the Reverend's daughter because he got her pregnant and the Reverend suggested it strongly with a shotgun. Maylin laughed, the sound bright against the afternoon stillness. She left that part out. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that had become its own conversation between them. Ethan had learned to read her silences, the thoughtful ones that meant she was working through something complicated, the comfortable ones that meant she was content, the tense ones that signaled worry or doubt. This was thoughtful silence, which meant a question was coming. "Do you think about it?" she asked finally. "Marriage." Ethan drove a nail home with 3 careful strikes before answering. "Yes." "And?" "And I don't know. Part of me wants it, wants you, wants to wake up knowing you're there instead of 5 miles away, wants to build something permanent instead of just this." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "But another part is scared. My parents weren't happy. My father married my mother because it was expected, and they spent 20 years making each other miserable before she died. I don't want that." "Neither do I. My marriage wasn't miserable, but it wasn't happy either. It was just empty, polite." She set down the hammer, turned to face him fully. "But I think what we have is different. We chose this. We're choosing it every day. That matters." "Does it? What if choosing isn't enough? What if we wake up 5 years from now and realize we made a mistake? Then we deal with it. Together." She reached out, touched his face with fingers that smelled like wood and work. "I'm not saying we should get married tomorrow, Ethan. I'm just saying we shouldn't be afraid to talk about what we want. Fear is a terrible compass." He caught her hand, held it against his cheek. "What do you want?" "Honestly, I want what we have now, but more of it. I want to not have to say goodbye at the end of every day. I want to wake up and make coffee for 2 instead of 1. I want to build something that lasts instead of just surviving alone and calling it strength." She pulled back slightly, her expression serious. "But I also want to make sure we're doing this for the right reasons. Not because the town expects it or because being alone is hard, but because we actually want to build a life together." "I do want that. I'm just scared." "I know. So am I." She picked up the hammer again, went back to work. "But being scared and doing it anyway is called courage, and I think we're both braver than we give ourselves credit for." The conversation stayed with Ethan as he rode home that evening, rolling around in his mind like a stone in his pocket, impossible to ignore. Marriage. Building a life together. Waking up knowing someone was there. The permanence of it both attracted and terrified him in equal measure. He was still thinking about it 2 days later when Tom Brennan showed up at his ranch looking grim. "We need to talk," Tom said without preamble. Ethan straightened from the water trough he'd been repairing, reading trouble in his friend's expression. "What happened?" "There's talk in town, bad talk, about you and Maylin. There's always talk. Not like this." Tom dismounted, paced a few steps like he couldn't stand still. "Henry Crawford was in the saloon last night, drunk and loud, saying things. About how it's not natural, a white man and a Chinese woman. How she's probably using you, trying to secure her position by seducing the local rancher. How people like her don't belong here." Anger flared hot in Ethan's chest. Henry Crawford was exactly the kind of small-minded fool who thought his bigotry was just common sense. "Let him talk. I don't care what Henry Crawford thinks." "You should care. Because he's not just talking. He's organizing, getting other men riled up. I heard him say something about making sure she knows she's not welcome, about teaching both of you a lesson about proper behavior." Tom met Ethan's eyes. "I think he's planning something, and I think you need to warn her." The anger turned cold, crystallizing into something sharp and dangerous. "If he touches her? I know. But you need to be smart about this. Henry's got friends, men who share his views. If this turns into a fight, you could both get hurt. Or worse." Ethan grabbed his hat, started toward his horse. "I need to see her, make sure she's safe." "I'll come with you." "No, stay here. If Crawford shows up, I want someone who can tell me what he said, what he's planning." Ethan swung into the saddle. "And Tom? Thank you for warning me. That's what friends do." The ride to Maylin's place felt like it took hours, even though Ethan pushed his horse harder than he should have. His mind spun through worst-case scenarios, each one darker than the last. Crawford was mean drunk and meaner sober, the kind of man who thought violence was just another tool for getting what you wanted. If he'd decided that Maylin was a problem that needed solving, he found her in her garden, peaceful and unaware, transplanting herbs from small pots into a neat row along the fence. She looked up when she heard him coming, her smile fading when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" He told her everything, Crawford's talk, the gathering anger, Tom's warning. Watched her face shift from confusion to understanding to something harder, something that spoke of experience with this kind of hatred. "I see," she said quietly when he finished. "I wondered when this would start. I've been lucky so far. People here have been, if not welcoming, at least civil. I should have known it wouldn't last." "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know that. But men like Crawford don't care about right or wrong. They care about keeping things the way they've always been. And a Chinese woman dating a white rancher disrupts their order." She brushed dirt from her hands, her movements precise and controlled. "What do you think he'll do?" "I don't know, but I'm not leaving you alone until we figure it out." "Ethan, no. I'm not arguing about this. If Crawford's planning something, I'm staying here. I can sleep in the barn if it makes you feel better, but I'm not riding home and leaving you unprotected." She looked at him for a long moment, something complicated moving through her expression. "The town will talk. If you stay here overnight, they'll assume things. Let them assume. I don't care what they think anymore. Your reputation means nothing if something happens to you." He took her hands, held them tight. "I choose you, Maylin, over reputation, over what the town thinks, over everything. So let me stay. Let me make sure you're safe." Her eyes went bright with unshed tears. "All right, but not the barn. If you're staying in the house. I'm not having you sleep with the horses when there's a perfectly good spare room." Nothing happened that night, or the next, or the one after that. But Ethan stayed anyway, helping with her work during the day and sitting watch through the evenings, learning the sounds of her house the way he knew his own. The creak of floorboards in certain spots, the way the wind rattled one particular window, the sound of her breathing from the room down the hall, steady and alive and safe. On the fourth night, she found him sitting at her kitchen table long after midnight, unable to sleep, staring at coffee that had gone cold in his cup. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. "Keep thinking I hear things. Horses. Voices. Probably nothing." She sat across from him, reached for his hand. "This is taking a toll on you, on both of us. We can't live like this, waiting for something terrible that might never come." "I know, but I can't leave. Not until I'm sure you're safe." "And when will that be? When Crawford publicly apologizes? When every man in town signs a pledge of good behavior?" She shook her head. "Evil men don't announce their intentions, Ethan. If Crawford wanted to hurt me, he would have done it by now. The fact that he hasn't suggests Tom might have been wrong about his plans, or that your presence here has already deterred him. Or he's waiting for me to leave." "Maybe. But we can't live our lives around his maybe. We can't let fear of what he might do control what we actually do." She squeezed his hand. "I appreciate you staying, more than you know. But you have your own ranch to run, your own work to do. You can't abandon everything just to play guard dog." "I'm not playing." "I know, but you're also exhausted. When was the last time you slept more than 3 hours? When was the last time you weren't looking over your shoulder, waiting for threats?" Her voice gentled. "This isn't living, Ethan. This is just surviving. And we both know surviving isn't enough." She was right. He knew she was right. But the thought of leaving her alone, of riding back to his empty house while she stayed here unprotected, it made his chest tight with anxiety he couldn't quite name. "What if something happens?" he said. "Then I'll deal with it. I'm not helpless, Ethan. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I know how to shoot. I keep a rifle by the door and another by my bed. I'm careful about locking doors, watching for riders, staying aware." She stood, moved around the table to sit beside him. "I need you to trust that I can handle myself, that I'm strong enough to survive without you watching over me every second." "I do trust you." "Then prove it. Go home tomorrow. Get some real sleep. Take care of your ranch. We'll both be more careful, more watchful, but we won't let Crawford's hatred dictate how we live our lives." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that staying was the only rational choice, But he looked at her sitting there in the lamplight, strong and certain, and refusing to be reduced to something that needed constant protection, and he understood what she was really saying. She wasn't asking him to stop caring. She was asking him to care in a way that respected her strength instead of diminishing it. "All right," he said, "I'll go home tomorrow. But you promise me, if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you ride straight to my place or into town. Don't try to handle it alone." "I promise." "And we check in with each other every day, every single day." "Agreed." They sat there together as the night deepened around them, holding hands across the space that had become so familiar, so necessary. Eventually, Maylin stood, pulled him up with her. "Come on," she said. "If you're leaving tomorrow, we might as well get what sleep we can." But at the doorway to the spare room, she hesitated, turned back to face him. "Ethan?" "Yes?" "Thank you. For caring enough to stay, for being willing to put yourself between me and danger, for choosing me even when it's hard." She stepped closer, rose up on her toes, kissed him softly. "I know what it costs you. The worry, the fear, the way you're tearing yourself apart trying to keep me safe. And I love you for it." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and true. "You love me?" he said. "Yes. Is that a problem?" Ethan thought about all the reasons it should be a problem. They'd known each other less than 2 months. Love was supposed to be slow, careful, built over years of small moments. Love was supposed to be safe and predictable, and nothing like the wild, desperate, terrifying thing he felt when he looked at her. "No," he said, "it's not a problem. Because I love you too." Her smile was brilliant, unguarded, full of joy and relief, and the kind of hope that made him believe anything was possible. "Good," she said. "Now go to bed before we do something the church ladies would definitely talk about." Ethan went home the next morning, but everything had changed. Love had been spoken, acknowledged, made real by the saying of it. And once something was real, you couldn't pretend it wasn't. You could only move forward and hope you were brave enough to hold on to it. 2 days later, Crawford made his move. Ethan was working his south fence when he saw the smoke, black and thick, rising from the direction of Maylin's place. His heart stopped, then started again, too fast, too hard, driving him toward his horse without conscious thought. He rode like hell was chasing him, pushing his horse to speeds that could break both their necks if they hit a prairie dog hole wrong. The smoke got thicker as he got closer, and he could smell it now, wood burning, something chemical underneath, the acrid stench of deliberate destruction. Her barn was on fire. Not a small fire, not an accident. This was intentional, planned, accelerated, with something that made the flames climb the old wood like they were racing toward judgment. Maylin stood in her yard with a bucket in her hands, her face streaked with soot and tears and fury, trying to fight something that was already beyond fighting. "Maylin!" He was off his horse before it fully stopped, running toward her. "Are you hurt?" "No, but the barn..." Her voice broke. I tried to stop it, but it's too fast, too hot." "Forget the barn. It's just wood. You're safe. That's all that matters." He grabbed her shoulders, made her look at him. "Did you see who did this? 3 men, faces covered. They rode up an hour ago, threw something through the barn door, and it just..." She gestured helplessly at the inferno that used to be her barn. "They laughed, Ethan. They stood there watching it burn, and they laughed." Rage, pure and cold and absolute, flooded through him. "Did you recognize them? Voices? Horses? Anything?" "One of them had a scar. Here." She touched the side of her neck. "I saw it when his bandana slipped." Crawford. Henry Crawford had a scar exactly there, from a knife fight 10 years ago that everyone in town knew about. Ethan had known Crawford was planning something, but this was beyond intimidation. This was destruction, a message written in fire and smoke. "I'm going to kill him," Ethan said flatly. "No, you're not." Maylin grabbed his arm, held tight. "That's what he wants. He wants you angry. Wants you to do something stupid so he can claim self-defense or say you attacked him first. Don't give him that satisfaction. He burned your barn. I know, and I'm furious, and I want to hurt him too. But we have to be smart. We have to..." She stopped, looking past him. "Someone's coming," Tom Brennan rode up with the Reverend and half a dozen other men from town, all of them looking grim and determined. They'd seen the smoke too, come to help fight the fire or salvage what could be saved. "Mei Lin, are you all right?" the Reverend asked, swinging down from his horse. "I'm fine, but the barn—" "Was it Crawford?" Tom demanded, looking at Ethan. "Three men," covered faces, but Mei Lin saw a scar that sounds like Crawford. Tom swore. The Reverend looked pained but unsurprised. The other men shifted uncomfortably, caught between neighborly obligation and not wanting to get involved in something that could turn ugly. "We should get the sheriff," one of them said finally. "The sheriff is Crawford's cousin," Tom pointed out. "You think he's going to arrest his own family on the word of a Chinese woman against three white men?" Silence. Because they all knew Tom was right. Justice in Juniper Ridge, like everywhere else, had a sliding scale based on who you were and who you knew. "Then what do we do?" the Reverend asked quietly. "We rebuild," Mei Lin said, her voice steady despite the tears still wet on her face. "We rebuild the barn. We make it clear that burning me out won't work, that I'm not leaving." She looked at each of the men in turn. "And we make it clear that this community doesn't tolerate this kind of violence, that there are consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Tom asked. Ethan stepped forward, his anger crystallizing into something sharper, more focused. The kind where every business in town refuses to serve Crawford, where every rancher refuses to help him with Roundup, where he becomes as isolated as he tried to make Mei Lin. He looked at the Reverend. "You preach about Christian charity and loving your neighbor. Time to put action behind those words." The Reverend looked uncomfortable, caught between doctrine and practicality. But slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. "You're right. What was done here is wrong, evil, and we can't let it stand." He raised his voice, addressing all the men. "I'll be discussing this from the pulpit Sunday, making it clear that violence and hatred have no place in this community, that those who participate will find themselves unwelcome in respectable society." It wasn't enough. Wasn't justice, wasn't punishment, wasn't anything close to what Crawford deserved. But it was something. A line drawn. A statement that this town, for all its flaws, wouldn't tolerate this particular evil. The barn burned itself out over the next few hours, collapsing into ash and charred timber that would take weeks to clear. The men stayed to help contain the fire, keep it from spreading to the house or fields. When it was finally over, when the last embers had been doused with bucket after bucket of water from the well, Mei Lin stood looking at the ruins of her barn with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. "I built that," she said quietly, "after I bought this place. Spent 2 weeks rebuilding it myself, board by board. It was mine. Something I'd made with my own hands, and they just destroyed it, because they could. Because I dared to exist in a way that made them uncomfortable. We'll rebuild it better than before." "That's not the point." She turned to face him, and her eyes were blazing with anger and hurt, and something fiercer than either. "The point is they thought they could scare me into leaving, thought burning my barn would break me, make me run back to California or wherever they think I belong." She straightened her shoulders. "But I'm not leaving. This is my home, my land, and I don't care how many barns they burn or threats they make. I'm staying." Ethan pulled her close, held her while she shook with rage and grief and stubborn determination. Around them, the other men started drifting away, heading back to their own ranches and families, their own comfortable lives where hatred was someone else's problem. But Tom stayed. And the Reverend. And 2 others whose names Ethan couldn't remember, but whose presence mattered. "We'll help rebuild," Tom said. "Whatever you need, lumber, labor, time, we'll make it right." "Why?" Mei Lin asked, her voice muffled against Ethan's chest. "Why help me when half the town probably agrees with Crawford?" "Because the other half doesn't," the Reverend said gently. "Because some of us still believe that how we treat the stranger in our midst says more about us than about them. Because—" he paused, searching for words. "Because it's right. And that should be reason enough." It was decided then, without formal discussion or vote. They would rebuild Mei Lin's barn. They would do it publicly, deliberately, making a statement that violence wouldn't be tolerated, that Mei Lin Zhang belonged in Juniper Ridge as much as anyone born there, and Henry Crawford, watching from wherever he'd gone to celebrate his arson, would see that his message of hate had failed. The rebuilding began 2 days later on a Sunday morning when most of Juniper Ridge should have been in church. But the Reverend himself arrived at Mei Lin's place at dawn with a wagon full of lumber and a dozen men who'd decided that building a barn was worship of a different kind. "Crawford won't be happy about this," one of the men said as they unloaded planks and beams, their breath misting in the cool morning air. "Crawford can go to hell," Tom Brennan replied cheerfully, "and he can take his opinions with him." Ethan worked alongside men he'd known his entire life, and some he barely recognized, all of them united by something larger than neighborliness. This was a statement. Every nail driven, every board fitted, every hour of labor donated, all of it said that Juniper Ridge would not be defined by Henry Crawford's hatred. Mei Lin moved among them with coffee and sandwiches, her face still showing the strain of the fire, but her spine straight, her chin lifted. She thanked each man individually, looked them in the eye, refused to be diminished by what had been done to her. "Your father would be proud," the Reverend told Ethan during a water break, watching Mei Lin explain to two of the younger men exactly how she wanted the barn door hung. "Not many men would stand up the way you have. Risk their reputation for someone the town's still deciding whether to accept. I'm not risking anything. I'm choosing her. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I stand, you're risking quite a bit. You're standing in the community, your business relationships, the goodwill you've built over 6 years of being steady Ethan Walker who never caused trouble." The Reverend paused. "I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it costs something. And you should be clear about what you're paying." Ethan thought about that as he went back to work, fitting rafters that would support a roof. Mei Lin would sleep under, building something permanent out of ashes and spite and stubborn love. What was he paying? His comfortable isolation, certainly. The safety of not caring enough about anyone to be destroyed by their destruction. The careful distance he'd maintained between himself and anything that might hurt him. But what he was gaining, the right to wake up thinking about someone other than himself, the privilege of her trust, the dangerous joy of being seen and chosen, that seemed worth any price the town wanted to extract. By sunset, the barn's frame stood skeletal but solid against the darkening sky, the work of many hands visible in its straight lines and careful joints. The men drifted away as full dark approached, satisfied with the day's progress, planning to return the following Sunday to finish the roof and walls. Mei Lin stood looking at the frame with an expression that made Ethan's chest ache. Not quite happiness, not quite relief. Something more complicated that involved loss and gratitude tangled together. "It's not the same," she said when they were alone, the last wagon rumbling away down her drive. "I know it will be better built, more solid, more everything, but it won't be mine the same way. I didn't build it alone. I didn't prove I could do it myself. No, you proved something better, that you don't have to do everything alone, that accepting help isn't weakness." Ethan moved to stand beside her, their shoulders touching. "Crawford wanted to break you. Instead, he gave you something to build on, showed you who your real neighbors are. The Reverend told me he's preaching about this next Sunday, about hatred and community and how Christians are supposed to treat strangers." She turned to look at him. "Do you think it will change anything? Make Crawford stop?" "I don't know, but I know silence makes men like Crawford braver. Speaking up, taking a stand, that at least tells him there are consequences, that he's not invisible." Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "But Mei Lin, you need to understand something. This might get worse before it gets better. Crawford's not the type to back down just because people disapprove. If anything, public condemnation might make him angrier, more dangerous." "Are you saying I should leave? That it's not worth the risk?" "No, I'm saying you need to decide what you're willing to fight for. And if you decide this place is worth it, then I'll stand with you, whatever comes." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the barn frame that rose like a promise against the stars. When she spoke, her voice was steady but fierce. "My whole life, people have told me what I can't do. Can't own property, can't run a business, can't marry who I choose, can't live where I want, can't exist in ways that make them uncomfortable." She turned to face him fully. "I'm done listening to can't. I'm done letting other people's fear and hatred dictate my choices. This is my land, my home, and I'm staying. Then we fight. Together? Together." She kissed him then, fierce and determined, tasting like coffee and smoke and stubborn hope. and Ethan kissed her back, knowing they were choosing something dangerous, something that would cost them both more than they could predict, but choosing it anyway because some things were worth the price. The Reverend made good on his promise that following Sunday, delivering a sermon that made half the congregation squirm and the other half nod in fierce agreement. He spoke about the Good Samaritan, about loving your neighbor, about how the measure of a community wasn't how it treated its own, but how it treated the stranger in its midst. He didn't name Crawford directly, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Everyone knew what had happened and what it meant. Crawford sat in the back pew, his face flushed with rage and shame, his hands clenched white-knuckled on the bench in front of him. When the service ended, he stormed out without speaking to anyone, and half a dozen men followed him, supporters, sympathizers, people who shared his views even if they lacked his courage to act on them. But more people stayed. More people came up to Ethan after the service, shook his hand, told him quietly that they supported what he was doing, that Maylin seemed like good people, that Crawford had crossed a line. It wasn't a victory, but it was something, a shift in the town's conscience, small and fragile, but real. The barn took 3 more Sundays to complete, rising board by board into something solid and weatherproof, better built than the original had ever been. Maylin worked alongside the men, learning techniques and contributing ideas, making sure it was still hers even though many hands shaped it. On the day they finished, she stood inside the completed structure looking up at rafters that would hold hay and house animals through Wyoming winters, and she cried. Not from sadness, but from something else. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or just the release of tension she'd been holding since the fire. Ethan found her there, wrapped his arms around her from behind, held her while she shook with emotion she'd been too strong to show before. "It's beautiful," she said when she could speak, "better than I could have built alone." "You were never alone. Not really. You just didn't know it yet." She turned in his arms, her face wet but smiling. "I want to marry you." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and absolutely right. "What?" Ethan said, because his brain had apparently stopped working. "I want to marry you. Not because the town expects it, or because it's practical, or because I need protection, but because I love you. Because you stood beside me when it was hard. Because you see me as strong instead of needing rescue. Because—" She stopped, searching for words. "Because when I imagine my future, you're in it, every part of it, and I don't want to imagine it any other way." Ethan's heart was doing something complicated in his chest, beating too fast and too hard, making his breath catch. We should... Is that a yes? He kissed her instead of answering, pouring 6 years of loneliness and 2 months of discovery and a lifetime of hope into the gesture. When they broke apart, he was smiling so wide his face hurt. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I'll marry you, on one condition." "What?" "We do it right. Not rushed, not because Crawford's pushing us or the town's pressuring us. We take our time, court properly. Make sure we're choosing this for the right reasons, and not just because we're both tired of being alone." Maylin nodded, understanding in her eyes. "How long?" 6 months. Give us time to be sure. To learn each other's worst habits and biggest fears. To fight and make up and figure out if we can actually build a life together." He touched her face, traced the line of her jaw. "I'm not worried we'll change our minds. I just want to do this right. Want to marry you knowing we gave ourselves every chance to be certain." 6 months, she agreed. "But Ethan, I'm already certain. So am I. But certain and ready are different things. Let's be both." They told no one about the engagement, keeping it private and precious between them. But they also stopped hiding what they were to each other. Ethan spent more time at her place than his own, helping with the work a ranch required, learning the rhythms of her life the way she was learning his. They ate meals together, worked side by side, fell into patterns of domesticity that felt both strange and natural. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Ethan discovered that Maylin sang while she worked, soft Chinese songs her mother had taught her, melodies that sounded like homesickness and memory. That she was meticulous about her garden but careless about washing dishes. That she had nightmares sometimes, waking with tears on her face from dreams she wouldn't discuss. That she was stronger than she looked and more fragile than she pretended, carrying wounds from her first marriage that hadn't quite healed. Mei Lin learned that Ethan woke before dawn every morning, driven by his father's voice in his head saying lazy men didn't deserve success. That he read poetry in secret, keeping a book of Whitman hidden in his nightstand like it was contraband. That he was terrible at asking for help, but generous about giving it. That his loneliness had carved spaces in him so deep, he sometimes didn't know how to fill them with anything good. They fought too. About small things that revealed bigger fears. About whether Mei Lin's chickens could free-range near Ethan's vegetable garden. About how much time they should spend at her place versus his. About whether to attend the 4th of July celebration in town, or avoid it entirely. "You can't hide from the town forever," Ethan said during one particularly tense discussion about the celebration. "I'm not hiding. I'm choosing not to subject myself to stares and whispers and Crawford's hatred for the sake of terrible potato salad and forced patriotism. If we don't show up, it looks like we're ashamed, like we're admitting there's something wrong with us being together." There is something wrong, in their eyes. And I'm tired of performing normalcy for people who've already decided I don't belong. Mei Lin's voice rose with frustration. "You don't understand what it's like. Being watched constantly, having every gesture analyzed, knowing that one wrong move, one moment of weakness, and they'll use it as proof that you're exactly what they thought you were." "You're right. I don't understand. Because I was born here, and they forgive me things they'd never forgive you. But that's exactly why we should go. To show them we're not going to hide. We're not going to make it easy for them to pretend we don't exist." They went. But Mei Lin was right about the stares and whispers, the way conversations paused when they approached, the careful distance most people maintained. Crawford was there with his supporters, drinking too much and laughing too loud, making comments just soft enough to deny but loud enough to hear. "Looks like Walker brought his laundress," one of Crawford's friends said, deliberately loud. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Mei Lin's grip on his arm tightened in warning. "Don't," she said quietly. "That's what they want. For you to lose your temper. Prove you're just as crude as they are." "He called you a laundress." "I know what he called me. I also know it doesn't matter. His opinion doesn't define me." She lifted her chin, met Crawford's eyes across the crowd with the kind of dignity that made his insult seem small and pathetic. "Let's get some lemonade. I'm thirsty." They lasted 2 hours before Mei Lin's composure started to crack, her smile becoming strained, her shoulders tight with the effort of pretending hateful comments didn't land. Ethan saw it and made their excuses, getting them out of there before she broke in public. "I hate them," she said on the ride home, the words torn from somewhere deep and hurting. "I hate how they make me feel, small, wrong, like I have to constantly prove I deserve to exist in their space." "I know. Do you? Do you really? Because you can walk away from this. You could decide I'm not worth the trouble and go back to your life. Find some nice white woman who the town approves of. Stop fighting battles that aren't even yours." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "But I can't walk away from being Chinese. I can't stop being the stranger they'll always see me as. This is my battle forever, Ethan, forever, and I'm so tired of fighting." He pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to her fully. "You're right. I could walk away. Could choose easy over hard, could stop fighting." He took her hands, held them tight. "But I won't, because this is my battle too. The moment I chose you, it became mine. And I choose you every day, every single day, no matter how hard they make it." "Why? Why would you do that to yourself?" "Because loving you is worth more than their approval. Because the life we're building together matters more than the comfort of fitting in. Because..." He paused, struggling for truth big enough to hold what he felt. "Because you make me brave. You make me better. You make me want to be the kind of man who stands for something instead of just surviving. And I'd rather fight beside you than have peace without you." She kissed him then, desperate and grateful and still crying, and Ethan held her while the sun set over empty prairie and the town they'd left behind celebrated freedom they weren't willing to extend to everyone. The months passed with the kind of speed that came from being too busy to notice time moving. Summer deepened into late July, then August, the land turning brown and stubborn under a sun that seemed personally offended by Wyoming's existence. Cattle moved to higher pastures seeking water and shade. Gardens struggled despite daily attention. And Ethan and Mei Lin worked through heat and hardship, building towards something neither of them could quite name yet, but both recognized as necessary. Crawford stayed quiet through most of it, which worried Ethan more than threats would have. Quiet meant planning. Quiet meant waiting for the right moment. Quiet meant danger postponed but not avoided. "He's going to try something," Tom warned during one of their regular conversations. "I don't know what or when, but he's not done." Men like Crawford don't just accept defeat. They nurse grudges until they find a way to act on them. "Let him try. We'll be ready." But ready for what? They didn't know, couldn't know, could only wait and watch and hope they'd see the threat coming in time to stop it. The answer came in late August, during the week before the county fair. Ethan was in town picking up supplies when he overheard Crawford talking to the sheriff in the saloon, their voices carrying through the open door. "I'm telling you, something's not right out at the Jang place. Seen strange men coming and going at odd hours. Heard things. Could be she's running some kind of illegal operation. Opium, maybe. You know how they are." Crawford's voice was smooth, reasonable, poisonous. "As a concerned citizen, I think it warrants investigation." The sheriff, who was indeed Crawford's cousin and had the intelligence of a fence post, nodded seriously. "That's a grave accusation, Henry, but if you've seen evidence, I suppose I should look into it. Public safety and all." Ethan's blood ran cold. This was Crawford's new strategy. Use the law itself as a weapon. Get the sheriff to search Maylin's property, plant evidence if necessary, manufacture a crime that would give them legal justification to run her out of town, or worse. He didn't bother with subtlety, just walked straight into the saloon, right up to Crawford's table. "She doesn't have opium," Ethan said flatly. "Never has. And we both know you're lying." Crawford's smile was slow and mean. "Walker, interesting that you'd know what's on her property. Spending a lot of time there, are you? People talk about that too, about how you're over there most nights, about what that means for a respectable rancher's reputation. I don't care what people say. Maybe you should, because when the sheriff finds what I think he's going to find, you being associated with her could mean trouble for you too. Harboring a criminal, conspiracy, all sorts of interesting charges." Crawford leaned back in his chair, supremely confident. "Of course, if you wanted to distance yourself now, before the investigation, no one would blame you. Smart man knows when to cut his losses. Go to hell, Crawford." "Now, Ethan," the sheriff said, standing up with the ponderous authority of a small man given power. "No need for language like that. Henry's just expressing concerns. As sheriff, I have a duty to investigate. Nothing personal. Everything about this is personal, and you know it." Ethan looked at both of them, seeing the trap they'd built, the legal fiction they'd created to make hatred look like justice. "When do you plan on conducting this investigation?" "Tomorrow, noon, with witnesses, of course. Everything proper and legal." Which meant they'd already planned what to find, where to plant it, how to make sure it looked authentic enough to fool people who wanted to be fooled. Tomorrow at noon, the sheriff would search Maylin's property, discover whatever Crawford had prepared, and the law itself would become the weapon that drove her out, unless Ethan found a way to stop it. He rode straight to Maylin's place, pushing his horse harder than he should have, arriving with enough urgency that she came out of the house alarmed. "What happened?" He told her everything. Crawford's accusation, the sheriff's planned search, the trap they'd built using law and prejudice as their tools. Maylin listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each word. When Ethan finished, she was silent for a long moment, thinking through options that got smaller and more desperate the more she considered them. "Can we stop them? Legally, I mean? I don't know, maybe, but it would take time we don't have. Lawyers, judges, procedures, and meanwhile Crawford has all night to make sure they find whatever he wants them to find. So what do we do?" Ethan had been thinking about that the whole ride over, turning possibilities around in his mind until one option kept rising to the surface. Dangerous, complicated, but maybe their only real choice. "We make sure there's nothing to find. We search your entire property tonight. Every building, every shed, every corner where something could be hidden. And if we find anything Crawford might have planted earlier, we remove it, burn it, make it disappear." He paused. "And then we make sure there are witnesses tomorrow. People Crawford can't intimidate. People whose word carries weight." "Who?" "The Reverend, Tom, maybe a few others. People who'll swear they were here when the sheriff searched. who will testify that nothing was found because nothing was there to find. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was something. A defense against the trap Crawford had built. They spent that night searching every inch of Mei Lin's property by lantern light, going through the barn, the chicken coop, the tool shed, even under the house itself, looking for anything that didn't belong, anything that could be used as evidence of crimes Mei Lin had never committed. They found it hidden in the new barn, stuffed between boards in a corner that would have been easy for the sheriff to search. A small leather pouch containing something that looked like dried plant matter. Opium, probably, or something meant to pass for it. Mei Lin held the pouch like it was venomous, her hands shaking with rage and fear. He was here, on my property, planting this, while we were... She couldn't finish. While we were trusting that the law would protect you. Ethan took the pouch from her, walked outside and burned it in the yard, watching it turn to ash and smoke that disappeared into the night sky. Not anymore. From now on, we protect ourselves. The Reverend arrived at dawn, Tom Brennan beside him, both men grim-faced and determined. Behind them came 4 others, ranchers and shopkeepers who'd helped rebuild the barn, men whose presence would make it harder for Crawford to manipulate the truth. We're here as witnesses, the Reverend said simply. Whatever the sheriff finds or doesn't find, we'll testify to it truthfully. Mei Lin stood on her porch watching them arrive, her face composed but her hands twisted together so tightly her knuckles showed white. Ethan moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, a silent statement of solidarity that everyone present understood. The sheriff arrived precisely at noon with Crawford trailing behind like a shadow with teeth. 2 deputies flanked them, young men who looked uncomfortable with the whole proceeding but unwilling to question authority. "Miss Zhang," the sheriff said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy that fooled no one. "I've received reports of illegal activity on your property. I'm here to conduct a search. You can cooperate willingly, or I can get a warrant, but either way, I'm searching this place." "Search all you want," Mei Lin said, her voice steady despite the fear Ethan could feel radiating from her. "You won't find anything because there's nothing to find." Crawford's smile was venomous. "We'll see about that." The search took 2 hours. The sheriff and his deputies went through every building, every room, every corner where something could be hidden. They searched the barn that the community had built, the house where Mei Lin lived, the sheds and coops and storage spaces. They opened trunks and looked under beds and examined shelves with the thoroughness of men who expected to find something damning, and found nothing. Ethan watched Crawford's expression shift from confident anticipation to confusion to rage as the search continued without result. He saw the moment Crawford realized his carefully laid trap had failed, that somehow the evidence he'd planted had disappeared, that his attempt to use the law as a weapon had backfired spectacularly. "There's nothing here, Henry," the sheriff said finally, looking frustrated and embarrassed. "No opium, no illegal goods, nothing that shouldn't be on a working ranch." "That's impossible. I saw—" Crawford stopped, realizing he was about to admit he'd been on Mei Lin's property without permission. "Check again. It has to be here somewhere. We've checked everywhere twice. Unless you want to tell me exactly where you think we should look?" The sheriff's tone had shifted, no longer quite so cooperative, starting to understand that maybe he'd been used. Crawford's face flushed dark red. "Fine. She must have hidden it, moved it when she heard we were coming. That proves guilt right there." "It proves nothing except that your accusations were baseless," the Reverend interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of moral certainty. "We've been here since dawn. Nothing was moved. Nothing was hidden. You accused this woman of crimes she didn't commit, used your cousin's position to harass her, and wasted everyone's time pursuing a vendetta based on prejudice rather than evidence." "You don't know what you're talking about, Reverend. She's a law-abiding property owner who's done nothing wrong except exist in a way that makes you uncomfortable," Tom Brennan finished. "We're all witnesses to that now, and we'll all testify to it if this goes any further." Crawford looked around at the assembled men, seeing his trap collapse, his influence crumble. The sheriff looked away, unwilling to meet his cousin's eyes. The deputies shifted uncomfortably, and Mei Lin stood there with her head high, refusing to be diminished by accusations that had failed to stick. "This isn't over," Crawford said, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "It is." Because if you come near her again, if you threaten her or damage her property or spread more lies, I'll make sure everyone in this county knows exactly what you did, how you planted evidence, how you used the sheriff's office to pursue personal vendettas, how you're nothing but a coward who hides behind the law when you can't win by honest means. You can't prove that. Maybe not in court, but I don't need court. I just need to talk. And in a town this small, talk spreads faster than fire. Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave Maylin alone, completely. You're going to stop your threats, stop your schemes, and find something else to do with your pathetic life. And if you don't, if you try anything like this again, I'll make it my personal mission to destroy whatever reputation you think you have left. Crawford stared at him, rage and hatred warring with the dawning realization that he'd lost, that his carefully constructed trap had not only failed but exposed him in the process, that continuing this fight would cost him more than he could afford. "You'll regret this, Walker," he said finally. "I doubt it." The sheriff and his deputies left first, clearly eager to escape the situation they'd been manipulated into. Crawford followed, but not before one last venomous look at Maylin that promised this defeat wouldn't be forgotten. When they were gone, the witnesses departed one by one, each stopping to tell Maylin they were glad nothing had been found, that they'd known Crawford was lying, that she was welcome in Juniper Ridge regardless of what small-minded men thought. The Reverend was the last to leave. He paused at the gate, looking back at Ethan and Maylin standing together on her porch. "You know this won't end it completely," he said. "Men like Crawford don't forgive being shown up. He'll nurse this grievance, turn it over in his mind, find new ways to make your lives difficult." "I know," Ethan said, "but you're staying anyway, both of you." "Yes." The Reverend nodded slowly. "Then I'll do what I can to make sure the community stands with you. It won't be everyone. Some people will always side with Crawford, believe his version of events, think you're the problem rather than him. But enough will stand with you. Enough to matter." He climbed into his wagon, gathered the reins. Enough to build a life on. When they were finally alone, Maylin sagged against Ethan like a puppet with cut strings, all the strength she'd been maintaining for hours suddenly gone. "I thought they'd find it," she whispered. "Even after we burned it, I thought somehow they'd find something else. That Crawford had planted more than one thing, but they didn't. You're safe." "Am I?" "The Reverend's right. Crawford won't stop. He'll just find new ways to hurt us, new traps to set. We'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next attack." Ethan turned her to face him, made her look at him. "Or we stop giving him power. Stop letting fear of what he might do control how we live. Stop waiting for his approval or defeat and just live. Build our life. Get married like we planned. Show him and everyone else that we're not going anywhere." "Get married," she repeated, like the words were foreign. "After everything that just happened, you still want to marry me?" "More than ever. Because if the last 6 months have taught me anything, it's that running from hard things doesn't make them easier. And loving you, choosing you, is the easiest hard thing I've ever done." He cupped her face in his hands. "So yes, let's get married. Let's do it publicly, loudly, in front of the whole town. Let's make it clear that we're not hiding, not apologizing, not letting anyone's hatred define what we build together." Maylin's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the most foolish. Probably both. But I'm tired of being careful, tired of measuring every action against what people might think. I love you, and I want to marry you, and I don't care who knows it or who disapproves." "When?" "Next month, at the church, with the whole town invited. We'll do it right. Ceremony, celebration, all of it. Give people something to talk about that isn't accusations and hatred." She kissed him then, fierce and grateful, and full of the kind of love that made fear seem small by comparison. And Ethan kissed her back, tasting salt from her tears and hope from her smile, knowing they were choosing something difficult but necessary, dangerous but true. The announcement of their engagement sent ripples through Juniper Ridge that became waves, that became a full storm of opinion and gossip. Some people were genuinely happy, offering congratulations and support. Others were scandalized, whispering about propriety and what it meant for the community. And some, like Crawford, were simply furious. But the wedding preparations continued regardless. Mei Lin sewed her own dress, simple white cotton with delicate embroidery along the collar and cuffs, her mother's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. Ethan bought a new suit, the first he'd owned in 6 years, and tried not to feel self-conscious about the expense. Tom Brennan agreed to stand as best man, grinning about finally seeing steady Ethan Walker do something impulsive. Martha Crawley, despite her complicated feelings about the whole situation, couldn't resist helping organize the reception, her need to be involved in community events overriding her discomfort with interracial marriage. The church was full on the day they married, packed with people from all over Carbon County who'd come to witness or judge or simply be part of the spectacle. Ethan stood at the altar watching Mei Lin walk down the aisle on Tom's arm. She had no family to give her away, so Tom had volunteered with the kind of friendship that needed no explanation, and thought about how far they'd both come from that spring dance where everything had started. She was beautiful. But more than that, she was strong, brave, real. Everything he'd been afraid to want and everything he'd needed without knowing it. The Reverend performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, speaking about love and courage and the choice to build something together despite opposition. About how the strongest marriages were forged in adversity, tested by hardship, made real by the decision to stand together when standing apart would be easier. Do you, Ethan Walker, take Mei Lin Zhang to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poor, as long as you both shall live? I do. And do you, Mei Lin Zhang, take Ethan Walker to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poor, as long as you both shall live? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Ethan kissed his wife, with a church full of witnesses and a future full of uncertainty and a heart full of hope that felt strong enough to carry them both through whatever came next. The reception was held at Mei Lin's ranch, the barn that the community had built becoming the site of their celebration. Tables groaned with food people had brought. Fiddles struck up dancing music, and for a few hours the divisions and prejudices that had marked their courtship seemed to fade into something gentler. Not forgiveness, perhaps, and certainly not forgetting, but a kind of acceptance that maybe this strange pairing might work after all. Crawford didn't attend, but his absence was noted and commented on, his refusal to participate in community celebration marking him more clearly than his presence would have. The tide was turning against him, slowly but surely. Each act of petty hatred, each public scene, each attempt to use the law to pursue vengeance, all of it was adding up to a reputation that would follow him longer than his grudge could last. "You did it," Tom said during a quiet moment, handing Ethan a cup of what was definitely not the punch being served to the church ladies. "Married the woman you love, survived Crawford's worst, proved you're braver than anyone gave you credit for." "We're not safe yet. Crawford's still out there, still angry." "True. But you're not alone anymore, and that counts for something." Tom raised his cup in salute. "To marriage, to courage, to choosing love even when it's hard." Ethan drank to that, watching his wife move through the crowd with grace and dignity, accepting congratulations and deflecting awkward questions with the skill of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile territory. She caught his eye across the barn and smiled, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for as long as he could remember. This was home. Not just the land or the buildings or even the town, but this, her smile, their partnership, the future they were building together against all odds and opposition. The days after the wedding settled into a new pattern, one that involved learning to live together rather than just court. Ethan moved most of his belongings to Mei Lin's place, keeping his own ranch running but making her property the center of their life together. They worked side by side, ate meals together, fell asleep tangled in each other, and woke to mornings that felt less lonely than either had known in years. But Crawford's shadow still lingered. Small things at first. Fences cut in the night. Cattle scattered. Supplies ordered but never delivered. The merchants apologizing nervously and saying there must have been a mistake. Nothing they could prove, nothing they could prosecute, but a steady drip of harassment that made it clear Crawford hadn't given up. "We could leave," Mei Lin said one evening after discovering another cut fence, her voice tired but not defeated. "Sell both properties, move somewhere Crawford's hatred can't reach us. Colorado maybe, or California. Start completely fresh. Is that what you want? She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the land she'd bought to prove she could build something alone, the land they were now building on together. No, I'm tired of running, tired of letting other people's hatred determine where I'm allowed to exist. This is our home. I'm not giving it up. Neither am I. So they stayed. And slowly, painfully, Crawford's harassment began to have the opposite effect of what he intended. Instead of driving them out, it drove the community closer to them. More ranchers started offering help, making it clear they sided with Ethan and Mei Lin over Crawford's petty vengeance. More merchants refused to participate in the quiet boycott Crawford was trying to organize. More people at church made a point of sitting near them, talking to them, treating them like the neighbors they were, rather than the scandal Crawford wanted them to be. The final confrontation came in late October, when the first real cold of autumn blew down from the mountains carrying the promise of winter. Ethan was in town picking up supplies when he saw Crawford corner Mei Lin outside the general store, his face flushed with drink and rage, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. "You think you've won," Crawford was saying. "Think because you got Walker to marry you that you're accepted here. But you're not. You'll never be. You're just—" "I'm his wife," Mei Lin interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "I'm a property owner. I'm a contributing member of this community. And I'm done listening to your hatred disguised as concern." "You're careful, Ethan said, appearing at Mei Lin's side, so suddenly Crawford startled backward. "Very careful about what you say next, because my wife has more patience than I do, and there's a limit to how much I'll tolerate." Crawford's hands clenched into fists. "What are you going to do, Walker? Hit me? In front of all these witnesses? That would just prove you're as uncivilized as I've been saying." "No, I'm not going to hit you. I'm going to give you a choice." Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You can continue this. Continue harassing us, cutting our fences, spreading your poison, and we'll continue documenting every incident, gathering every witness, building a case that even your cousin the sheriff can't ignore. Eventually, you'll cross a line that has legal consequences. And when you do, we'll make sure you face them. Or," Crawford's voice dripped with contempt, "or you can let this go. Accept that you lost. That Mei Lin and I are married, we're staying, and nothing you do is going to change that. You can redirect all that energy you've been wasting on hatred into something productive. And maybe, just maybe, salvage what's left of your reputation before you destroy it completely. You think I care about my reputation? I think you should, because right now people are starting to realize what you really are. A small man with small hatreds, trying to feel big by making others small. And that's not a legacy anyone wants to leave." Crawford looked around at the people who'd gathered to watch the confrontation, saw the judgment in their faces, the way even his supporters were starting to look uncomfortable with his behavior, saw the way the tide had turned against him, how his crusade against Mei Lin had backfired into his own isolation. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes," Mei Lin said quietly. "It is, and you know it." Crawford stood there for another moment, rage and defeat warring in his expression. Then he turned and walked away, shoulders hunched, heading toward the saloon where men who'd run out of better options drank away their failures. Ethan watched him go, feeling not triumph, but something sadder. Pity, maybe, for a man so consumed by hatred he'd destroyed his own standing in the community to pursue it. "Is it really over?" Mei Lin asked quietly. "I don't know. But even if it's not, even if he tries something else, we've proven we can handle it, that we're strong enough together to face whatever comes." He took her hand, laced their fingers together, and that's enough. The winter that followed was harsh, testing them in ways that had nothing to do with Crawford or prejudice or community acceptance. Blizzards that lasted days, temperatures that dropped so low the water froze in the well, illnesses that swept through the cattle and had to be fought with constant vigilance and exhausted determination. But they faced it together. Ethan learned that Mei Lin was methodical about winter preparations, making lists and checking them twice, never leaving anything to chance. Mei Lin learned that Ethan could go 3 days without sleep when the cattle needed tending, driven by the same relentless work ethic his father had beaten into him, the same fear of failure that had shaped his entire adult life. They fought sometimes, tensions running high when they were trapped inside by storms that made going outside dangerous. Fought about small things that stood in for bigger fears, about money, about work, about whether to buy more cattle or save for a bad season. But they also learned to fight fair, to say what they meant, to apologize when wrong and forgive when hurt. And somewhere in that brutal winter, something shifted. The town stopped seeing them as a scandal and started seeing them as just Ethan and Mei Lin, the rancher couple who worked hard and kept to themselves and seemed to make each other happy despite all odds. The invitations started coming, to socials, to church functions, to community gatherings. Not from everyone, certainly, but from enough people to matter. Martha Crawley even apologized in her roundabout way during a church social in January. "I may have been less welcoming than I should have been," she said, not quite meeting Mei Lin's eyes. "When you first arrived, I had concerns about how things would go, whether you'd fit in, whether—" She stopped, struggling with honesty. "Whether it was right, a Chinese woman and a white man. It challenged things I'd always believed about proper order." "And now?" Mei Lin asked. "Now I see two people who clearly love each other, who work hard, who contribute to this community, who faced hatred with more grace than I would have managed." Martha's expression softened. "And I see that maybe proper order is less important than treating people with kindness, that maybe I was wrong." It wasn't a complete apology, wasn't an admission that prejudice itself was wrong, just that this particular prejudice might have been misapplied. But it was something, a crack in the armor of certainty, a small step toward change. "Thank you," Mei Lin said simply. "That means more than you know." Spring came eventually, the way it always did in Wyoming, sudden and fierce, the land remembering how to be green, the cattle returning from their winter stubbornness to something approaching contentment. And with spring came news that spread through Juniper Ridge like wildfire. Henry Crawford was leaving, selling his property, packing up, heading to Montana where his sister lived and where no one knew his history or his hatreds. The story was that he wanted a fresh start, but everyone knew the truth. He'd been beaten, not by violence or law, but by simple persistence. By Ethan and Mei Lin refusing to leave, refusing to hide, refusing to let his hatred define their lives. "Good riddance," Tom said when he brought the news. "Though I almost feel sorry for Montana. They don't know what they're getting." Ethan watched Crawford's wagon roll out of town a week later, loaded with possessions and failures, heading toward a future that would probably involve finding new people to hate, new causes to champion, new ways to feel superior by making others inferior. "Do you feel relieved?" Mei Lin asked, standing beside him as Crawford disappeared down the road that led away from Juniper Ridge. "I feel empty, like I'd built my life around opposing him, and now that he's gone, I don't know what to do with all that energy." "We build," she said simply. "Not in opposition to anything, just build. Our life, our future, our family." "Our family," Ethan repeated, and something in his wife's smile made him pause. "Mei Lin? I'm pregnant, about 2 months, I think. I wanted to wait until I was sure before telling you." She took his hand, placed it on her belly, where nothing showed yet, but everything was changing. "We're going to have a baby." Ethan felt something break open in his chest, joy so fierce it almost hurt, hope so wild it made his eyes sting with tears he wasn't too proud to shed. A baby. A child. The future made real in a way that transcended all the hatred and hardship they'd faced. "Are you happy?" Mei Lin asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He pulled her close, held her like she was precious and breakable, and the strongest thing he'd ever known all at once. Terrified, yes. Completely unprepared, definitely, but happy. So incredibly happy. They stood there in the spring sunshine, watching Crawford's wagon disappear into the distance, and felt the future open up before them. Uncertain still, probably difficult, definitely full of challenges they couldn't predict, but also full of possibility, full of hope, full of the kind of love that was worth fighting for. The baby came in November, a girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn chin and lungs that announced her arrival to half of Carbon County. They named her Sarah Grace, Sarah for resilience, Grace for the gift of second chances. The town threw them a celebration, the women bringing blankets and advice, the men congratulating Ethan with varying degrees of awkwardness and genuine pleasure. Even the Reverend stopped by to offer a blessing that involved more talk of love and perseverance than standard religious doctrine. "She's beautiful," Martha Crawley said, peering into the cradle with the kind of fierce adoration that grandmothers by proxy specialized in. "And she's going to grow up strong. I can tell. Has that look in her eye." "Like her mother," Ethan said. "Like both her parents," Martha corrected. "Takes strength to build what you two have built. Takes courage to love across lines people say shouldn't be crossed. She'll inherit that. She'll grow up knowing love is stronger than hatred, that courage is choosing hard things because they're right, that family is what you build rather than what you're born into." It was the most profound thing Ethan had ever heard Martha Crawley say, and it made him understand that maybe the town's change wasn't superficial after all. Maybe seeing him and Mei Lin build a life together, watching them weather storms, literal and figurative, had shifted something fundamental in how people thought about difference and belonging. Or maybe he was giving them too much credit. Maybe they'd just gotten used to him and Mei Lin the way people got used to anything, through sheer repetition and the passage of time. But watching his daughter sleep in his wife's arms while the community that had once been divided over their right to exist now gathered to celebrate their family, that felt like victory. Quiet, incomplete, imperfect, but real. The years that followed weren't easy. Ranching in Wyoming never was. They faced droughts and blizzards, market crashes and cattle disease. The endless grinding work of coaxing a living from land that gave grudgingly and took freely. Sarah grew from infant to toddler to a girl who could ride before she could read and had her mother's stubbornness matched with her father's sense of justice. But they faced it together. Ethan and Mei Lin, the rancher and his wife, the scandal that became simply marriage, the outsider who became insider through the simple act of staying. They built their life board by board, fence post by fence post, small moment by small moment, proving that love chosen deliberately was stronger than hatred inherited thoughtlessly. And on summer evenings, when the work was done and the light turned everything golden, they'd sit on their porch watching Sarah play in the yard, and Ethan would remember the man he'd been before Mei Lin, lonely, isolated, convinced that strength meant needing no one. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone he'd known briefly and left behind gladly. "What are you thinking about?" Mei Lin would ask. The question she'd been asking for years, never satisfied with surface answers. "How different everything is. How close I came to missing this. If I hadn't gone to that dance, if I hadn't talked to you, if I'd chosen safety over risk," he'd shake his head. "I would have spent my whole life half alive and never known it." "We both would have," she'd say, taking his hand the way she always did, their fingers fitting together with the ease of long practice. "But we didn't. We chose each other. We chose this. And we keep choosing it every day." "Every day," he'd agree. And that was the truth of it, really. Love wasn't the dramatic moment of the wedding or the crisis of Crawford's hatred or even the joy of Sarah's birth. Love was the daily choice to stay, to work, to try again when you failed, to forgive when you were hurt, to show up even when showing up was hard. Love was Ethan riding out to check fences in February cold while Mei Lin stayed inside teaching Sarah her letters. Love was Mei Lin defending Ethan's honor to church ladies who thought he'd married beneath him. Love was both of them lying awake at night worrying about money and cattle and whether they were doing right by their daughter, then getting up the next morning and working anyway because that's what you did when you'd chosen to build something together. Love was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, disappointing and transcendent, exactly what you expected and nothing like you'd imagined. On their 10th anniversary, they threw a party. Not a big one, just Tom and Sarah Mitchell, who'd finally married after years of dancing around each other, the Reverend and his wife, a few ranchers and their families who'd become real friends through the years. They gathered in the barn that had been rebuilt after Crawford's arson, ate food and told stories, and celebrated a marriage that had survived long enough to stop being remarkable and start being simply real. "Speech," Tom called out, raising his glass. "Let's hear from the man who proved that hermit ranchers can learn to be human after all." Ethan stood, pulling Mei Lin up with him, looking out at the faces of people who'd become family through choice rather than blood. 10 years ago, he said, I thought I knew what strength was. Thought it meant surviving alone, needing nothing, keeping everyone at arm's length. I built fences and thought I was building a life. He paused, finding the words for something he'd never been good at expressing. Then I met Mei Lin, and she showed me that real strength isn't isolation. It's vulnerability. It's choosing to need someone, to let them see you completely, to build something together that neither of you could build alone. He turned to his wife, this woman who'd walked into his loneliness and refused to let him stay there, who'd faced hatred with dignity and hardship with determination, and his worst qualities with patience and love. You made me braver than I knew I could be. You gave me a home when I thought empty houses were all I deserved. You gave me a daughter who's going to change this town the way you changed me. Just by existing, just by being exactly who she is, just by refusing to apologize for taking up space in the world. His voice roughened with emotion. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful every single day that you chose me back. Mei Lin stood on her toes and kissed him. This man who'd stood beside her when standing alone would have been easier, who'd chosen love over comfort and her over anyone's approval. We deserved each other, she said when they broke apart. We still do, and we'll keep deserving each other every day we keep choosing to try. The party continued around them, music and laughter and the comfortable noise of people who'd found their way to belonging. And Ethan looked at his wife, his daughter playing with Tom's son in the corner, the community that had grudgingly accepted them and gradually embraced them, the life they'd built from ashes and stubbornness and love too strong to be denied. He thought about the spring dance where everything had started, that drunken, blurted proposal that should have been a joke but became the most serious thing he'd ever said. Thought about how Mei Lin had answered with 5 words that changed everything. I thought you'd never ask, rancher. She'd been right to call him that, not by name, but by identity. He was a rancher, someone who worked hard land and made it yield life against all odds. Someone who built fences to protect what mattered rather than keep everyone out. Someone who understood that the strongest things weren't the ones that stood alone, but the ones that grew roots deep enough to weather any storm. And she was his partner in that work, his equal in that fight, his home when the world felt too vast and his strength when his own ran out. Outside, the Wyoming wind carried the scent of sage and coming summer. The mountains stood purple and patient under an endless sky, and the land they'd chosen to build on stretched away in all directions, harsh and beautiful, demanding and generous, exactly like the life they'd made together. Ethan Walker was no longer the loneliest man in Carbon County. He was a husband, a father, a member of a community that had learned, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely, that love was stronger than the walls people built to keep it out. And that was enough, more than enough. That was everything. Sonnet 4.5. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.